The transport ship Times Nexus Herald Times shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, its hull groaning under the stress of dimensional transition. Through the viewport, the Galactic Military Academy sprawled across 3 moons of Kepler 442b, its crystalline towers and training facilities glinting in the light of twin suns. For most cadets aboard, this moment represented the culmination of years of preparation and political maneuvering to secure admission to the galaxy's most prestigious military institution. Sarah Chen pressed her face against the cold metal wall, watching the academy grow larger as their shuttle descended. Around her, representatives from dozens of species chattered excitedly in their native tongues. The Zephyrians' melodic whistles harmonized with the Kalari's rhythmic clicking, while the massive Thorkin delegates communicated through subsonic rumbles that vibrated through the ship's deck plating. "Look at that human," sneered Vextar, a Kalari noble whose exoskeleton bore the ceremonial scarring of his warrior caste. "She hasn't spoken once during the entire journey. Are all your species so primitive in their social development?" His companion, a sleek Zephyrian named Cilia, whose feathers shimmered with bioluminescent patterns, trilled a laugh. "Perhaps she's mute. I've heard humans are prone to genetic defects from their toxic homeworld. Such a shame the Council insisted on including them in the exchange program." Sarah's fingers tightened slightly around the worn leather journal in her lap, but she gave no other sign she'd heard their conversation. The universal translator made their words crystal clear, but she'd learned long ago that silence often revealed more about others than any response could. Her dark eyes continued tracking the Academy's defensive satellites and patrol squadrons, cataloging their formations and identifying potential weaknesses out of pure habit. The truth was, Sarah had been observing everything and everyone since boarding the transport at Luna Station 3 weeks ago. She'd noted that Vextar favored his left side when walking, suggesting an old injury or biomechanical imbalance. Celia's feathers shifted to specific color patterns when she lied, which happened frequently when discussing her academic achievements. The Thorkin twins, Grok and Graal, appeared brutish, but had spent hours quietly discussing advanced quantum physics when they thought no one was listening. Most importantly, she'd identified the 3 hegemony infiltrators among their class. Their cover identities were excellent, but they all shared the same tell: a slight hesitation before accessing their personal datapads. As if remembering which false identities access codes to use, Sarah had already drafted a security report in her mind, complete with recommended countermeasures, though she doubted anyone would take a quiet human seriously enough to listen. The Academy's receiving bay was a cathedral of polished metal and energy shields, large enough to dock capital ships. Their transport settled onto a landing pad marked with glyphs from 50 different writing systems, and the bay doors sealed shut with a resonant clang. Atmospheric processors hummed to life, adjusting the environment to accommodate the diverse respiratory needs of the incoming class. "Attention cadets," announced a voice that bypassed their universal translators entirely, speaking directly to their auditory processing centers through quantum field manipulation. "You will disembark in order of species classification, maintain formation discipline, and proceed to Orientation Hall 7 for initial processing." The species classification system ranked civilizations by their technological advancement and military contributions to the Galactic Council. Humans, being the newest member species, were dead last. Sarah watched as the ethereals floated past like living starlight, followed by the crystalline architects whose bodies chimed musical notes with each step. The Thorkin delegation stomped by in perfect military formation, their powered armor systems syncing with audible whirs and clicks. 20 minutes later, Sarah finally stepped onto the Academy's deck plating. The artificial gravity was set to standard galactic, roughly 1.2 times Earth normal. But she adjusted her stride without conscious thought. Her luggage consisted of a single military surplus duffel bag containing 3 changes of clothes, basic hygiene supplies, her father's old service pistol, and 17 tactical manuals, written in languages the Academy's systems couldn't identify. Orientation Hall 7 resembled an amphitheater designed by committee, with seating arrangements optimized for beings ranging from meter-tall Pixian to the massive colossi who required specialized anti-grav platforms. Sarah found herself assigned to a section designated for medium humanoid bipeds, alongside several other species she didn't recognize. The orientation officer was a Meridian, her crystalline body reflecting the hall's lighting in prismatic patterns. "Welcome to the Galactic Military Academy," she began, her voice carrying harmonics that made even the universal translators struggle. "I am Instructor Quinn Dalil. For the next 4 standard years, this institution will forge you into the defenders of galactic civilization." The speech that followed was standard motivational fare about honor, duty, and sacrifice. Sarah found herself studying the hall's architecture instead, noting the defensive positions built into the decorative elements and the way the exit routes were designed to channel crowds in predictable patterns. When a minor earthquake shook the building, she was the only cadet who noticed that several wall panels were actually concealed weapon emplacements. "Your dormitory assignments have been calculated based on species compatibility and psychological profiles," Instructor Quinn Dalil continued. "Roommate pairings are designed to promote cross-cultural understanding and combat effectiveness. You will find your assignments on your personal datapads, along with your class schedules and academy regulations." Sarah's datapad chimed softly, and she glanced at the screen. "Room 847B. Level 23, Tower Gamma." Her roommate was listed as Kethara Thos. Species designation, Vorthan. Specialization unknown. She'd never heard of the Vorthans, which was unusual given her extensive study of galactic species profiles. The dormitory towers were functional rather than elegant, clearly designed to house thousands of cadets with minimal amenities. The corridors hummed with ventilation systems working overtime to accommodate dozens of atmospheric preferences, creating a constant background noise that would have driven most humans to distraction. Sarah found it oddly comforting, reminiscent of the engine noise aboard the merchant vessels where she'd spent her childhood. Room 847B was a standard double-occupancy unit with 2 sleep alcoves, a shared study area, and basic hygiene facilities. The walls were adaptive, smart matter that could adjust transparency and color based on occupant preferences. One side of the room had been configured with what appeared to be a specialized atmosphere generator and a gravity field projector set to nearly twice galactic standard. Sarah was stowing her gear when the door chimed and slid open. Her roommate entered in a powered mobility suit that hissed and whirred with each movement. Through the suit's transparent aluminum faceplate, Sarah could see features that suggested a high-gravity world origin. Dense bone structure, compact musculature, and eyes adapted for low-light conditions. "You must be the human." The voice came through the suit's external speakers with a slight electronic distortion. "I am Kethara. I was warned that humans require verbal communication for social bonding, but I am unfamiliar with your species' protocols." Sarah closed her locker and turned to face her roommate properly. "Sarah Chen. And no special protocols required. Mind if I ask about the suit? Environmental incompatibility?" Kethara's helmet turned slightly, as if surprised by the directness of the question. "My homeworld's gravity is 2.7 standard. Your physiology would be crushed within minutes, just as mine would cease to function properly in this reduced field. The suit maintains appropriate pressure and atmospheric composition. Must be expensive to maintain. Custom manufacturing? You are observant." "Yes." The Academy was required to invest considerable resources in accommodation systems. Many questioned whether it was worthwhile for a single cadet. There was something carefully neutral in Kethara's tone that suggested this was a sensitive topic. Sarah nodded and returned to unpacking, letting the conversation lapse into comfortable silence. She noticed that her roommate moved with precise, economical motions despite the bulky suit, suggesting extensive military training or natural grace under adverse conditions. The atmospheric generator's hum changed pitch when Kethara adjusted some controls Sarah couldn't see, and the air suddenly carried traces of ozone and metallic tang. Their first class was basic galactic military theory, held in a lecture hall that could accommodate 300 cadets. Professor Tal Rath was a Kalari veteran whose exoskeleton bore battle scars from the hegemony wars and whose reputation for breaking overconfident cadets was legendary throughout the academy. "Military science," he began without preamble, "is the study of organized violence applied with precision and purpose. Some of you come from species with proud warrior traditions. Others represent civilizations that have known peace for millennia. Here, those distinctions are irrelevant. Here, You will learn to think like predators. The lecture covered basic concepts that Sarah had absorbed before her 15th birthday, but she took careful notes anyway. Around her, cadets from advanced civilizations scribbled frantically as Professor Talrath outlined principles of tactical deception and resource allocation that apparently weren't covered in their preparatory education. Cadet Cilia, the professor's attention suddenly focused on the Zephyrian noble. Your species controls the largest merchant fleet in the galaxy. How would you deny an enemy access to critical supply routes? F. Celia's feathers shifted to confident blue-green patterns. Deploy patrol squadrons at key hyperspace nexus points and establish inspection protocols for all commercial traffic. Inefficient and resource-intensive. Anyone else? Sarah felt 300 pairs of eyes focus on her. She'd been expecting this. Professors often used the primitive species as examples of incorrect thinking. Attack the routes themselves, sir. Hyperspace beacons can be disabled or repositioned. If you control the navigation infrastructure, you control all traffic, regardless of military presence. The silence that followed was profound. Professor Talrath's mandibles clicked in what Sarah recognized as surprise. Explain your reasoning. Most species depend heavily on automated navigation systems for hyperspace travel. Disable or compromise the beacon network, and even military vessels become effectively stranded unless they have experienced navigators trained in manual plotting. It's a force multiplier that turns an enemy's technological dependence into a vulnerability. Several cadets began whispering among themselves, their universal translators creating a babble of confused chatter. The Zephyrian delegation looked genuinely alarmed, apparently realizing that their merchant empire's mobility depended entirely on infrastructure they'd never considered vulnerable. Professor Talrath's attention remained fixed on Sarah. And how would you implement such an attack without detection? Social engineering, sir. Beacon maintenance requires regular technical updates. Insert malicious code through seemingly routine maintenance protocols. Then activate it remotely. When hostilities commence, by the time the enemy realizes what's happened, their entire fleet is scattered across dozens of star systems, with no reliable way home. The professor's mandibles clicked again, and Sarah caught what might have been approval in his expression. Interesting perspective. From a species barely capable of interstellar travel, perhaps humanity's primitive nature offers certain advantages in thinking beyond conventional parameters. As the lecture continued, Sarah noticed that other cadets were now glancing in her direction, with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. The Kalari noble who'd mocked her during the journey was staring at her with what she recognized as the focused attention of a predator evaluating potential prey. When class ended, Sarah gathered her notes and headed for the exit. A shadow fell across her path as one of the Thorkin twins stepped into her way, his massive form blocking the corridor despite other cadets flowing around them like water around a boulder. You think cleverly, little human, Grok rumbled, his voice carrying subsonic frequencies that made nearby furniture vibrate. But clever thinking and battlefield reality are different things. Perhaps you would benefit from practical demonstration of proper military principles. Sarah looked up at the 3-meter-tall alien whose powered armor could probably punch through starship hull plating. His twin brother had positioned himself to block her alternate escape routes, while other cadets were giving them a wide berth. This was clearly a planned confrontation designed to establish hierarchy within their class. I appreciate the offer, Sarah replied calmly, but I think I'll stick to theoretical study for now. Grok's laugh was like grinding stone. This was not a request. Soft creature. On Thork, strength determines truth. You spoke as if you understand warfare, but your species has never faced truly dangerous enemies. You will learn proper respect for your betters. The corridor around them had gone quiet as other cadets realized what was happening. Interspecies conflicts were technically forbidden, but enforcement was often lenient when it came to educational opportunities between cadets. Sarah could feel dozens of eyes watching, waiting to see how the quiet human would handle her first real challenge at the academy. She set down her datapad and took a step back, giving herself room to move. Are you sure about this? Because once we start, I'm not going to stop until you're on the ground. Both Thorkin twins laughed now, the sound echoing off the corridor walls. Graal cracked his knuckles with sounds like breaking timber. Your confidence is amusing, little soft skin. Try not to break too easily. Grok reached for her with a massive, gauntleted hand, moving with surprising speed for something his size. Sarah wasn't there when his fingers closed on empty air. She'd slipped sideways and grabbed his extended wrist, using his own momentum to guide him into an off-balance stumble that sent him crashing into the corridor wall with enough force to crack the smart matter surface. The hallway erupted in shocked gasps and chittering from a dozen different species. Growl roared in anger and charged forward. But Sarah was already moving. She ducked under his swing and drove her elbow into the joint where his thigh armor connected to his hip guard, targeting the mechanical linkage that powered his suit's leg servos. Sparks flew as something critical failed, and Growl's left leg locked up in mid-stride. He toppled forward like a falling tree, and Sarah rolled aside to let 300 kilos of Thorkin warrior crash face first into the deck plating. Grok had recovered, and was advancing more cautiously now, his massive hands held in what she recognized as a Thorkin military combat stance. His expression had shifted from amusement to focused concentration, as he realized this wasn't going to be the simple dominance display he'd expected. "Impossible," he growled. "Humans lack the strength to damage Thorkin combat armor." Sarah wiped a trickle of blood from where Growl's gauntlet had clipped her cheek during his fall. "I didn't damage your armor. I damaged the machinery inside it." There's a difference. She could see him processing this information, his tactical training warring with cultural assumptions about human capabilities. Thorkin society was built around direct applications of overwhelming force, and the concept of using an enemy's technology against them was apparently foreign to his thinking. The fight that followed was unlike anything the assembled cadets had ever witnessed. Grok possessed strength that could bend steel and reflexes, enhanced by military-grade neural implants, but Sarah moved like liquid shadow, always appearing where his attacks weren't. She targeted joints, sensors, and power couplings with surgical precision, gradually degrading his armor's systems until warning lights strobed across his helmet display. When she finally brought him down, it was with a move so simple that several cadets gasped in disbelief. As Grok lunged forward in a final desperate attack, Sarah simply stepped aside and swept his leading leg. Without his armor's balance assist, which she'd disabled by shorting out its gyroscopic sensors, he crashed to the deck beside his twin brother. The corridor fell silent except for the hum of ventilation systems and the sparking of damaged electronics. Sarah stood over two of the Academy's most feared cadets, neither of whom would be walking normally for several days. Her breathing was slightly elevated, but she showed no other signs of exertion. "Anyone else want to help me with practical demonstrations?" she asked the assembled crowd. The answer, delivered in a dozen languages and twice as many nervous glances, was a unanimous negative. As security officers arrived to sort out the incident, Sarah noticed Professor Talrath watching from a corridor intersection. The Kalari warrior's compound eyes fixed on her with unmistakable interest, and his mandibles clicked in what she was beginning to recognize as approval. The quiet human had just announced herself in the most direct way possible. The Academy was about to discover exactly what humanity was capable of when pushed into a corner, and Sarah Chen was just getting started. Word of the corridor incident spread through the Academy faster than a hyperspace transmission. By the time Sarah reached her next class, Advanced Tactical Analysis, every cadet in the room was watching her with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. The professor, an elderly Meridian named Instructor Velthara, whose crystalline body pulsed with decades of stored knowledge, seemed unusually interested in the new dynamic. "Today we will examine the Battle of Kepler Station," she announced, her voice creating harmonic resonances that made the room's acoustic dampeners work overtime. A textbook example of how superior numbers and technology can overcome primitive tactics. Sarah recognized the engagement immediately. 3 years ago, a hegemony fleet had attempted to seize the strategic listening post at Kepler Station. The battle had lasted 14 hours and ended with the station's destruction and heavy casualties on both sides, but she'd never seen it described as a victory for superior numbers and technology. The holographic display activated, showing the star system in three-dimensional detail. Red markers indicated hegemony positions, while blue represented the Galactic Defense Force. The tactical situation looked hopeless. 300 enemy vessels against a garrison of barely 50 ships and a single space station. The hegemony forces, Instructor Velthara continued, demonstrated classic principles of concentrated firepower and coordinated movement. Observe their initial formation. Sarah watched the simulation unfold with growing disbelief. The official Academy version bore only superficial resemblance to what had actually happened at Kepler Station. According to this sanitized reconstruction, the hegemony had won through superior tactics and overwhelming force, while the defenders had fought bravely but ineffectively before succumbing to inevitable defeat. Cadet Silea. The instructor's attention focused on the Zephyrian noble. What strategic errors did the defenders commit that made their defeat inevitable? Celia's feathers shifted to confident patterns as she consulted her notes. They failed to concentrate their forces at the primary engagement zone and allowed themselves to be divided into smaller formations that could be defeated in detail. Correct. A fundamental principle of space combat is maintaining formation integrity. The human ships, in particular, displayed typically primitive tactics by breaking formation to engage targets individually. Sarah's jaw tightened as she recognized the specific engagement being misrepresented. The human vessels hadn't broken formation out of inexperience. They'd executed a carefully planned feint that drew the hegemony fleet into a trap. Captain Morrison's sacrifice had saved the entire sector, but apparently that didn't fit the Academy's preferred narrative. However, Instructor Velthara continued, even flawed tactics can occasionally produce unexpected results. The defenders did manage to inflict significant casualties through sheer persistence and... She paused, as if searching for diplomatic phrasing. Creative applications of standard procedures. The simulation showed human ships ramming hegemony vessels, using mining charges as improvised weapons, and employing atmospheric entry maneuvers that should have been impossible for their class of vessel. To the Academy's analysts, these looked like desperate last-ditch tactics. Sarah knew they were deliberate strategies developed specifically to counter hegemony technological advantages. Creative applications, Sarah repeated quietly, her voice carrying just enough edge to draw attention. Is that what we're calling asymmetric warfare now? The room went silent. Instructor Velthara's crystalline body pulsed with slightly different patterns, indicating surprise or possibly annoyance. Did you have something to contribute, Cadet Chen? Just an observation about the tactical analysis, ma'am. The human ships weren't displaying primitive tactics or breaking formation out of inexperience. They were implementing a coordinated strategy designed to exploit hegemony operational doctrine. The instructor's body brightened, clearly skeptical. Explain. Sarah stood, moving to the holographic display controls. May I demonstrate using the tactical projector? Proceed. Sarah's fingers danced over the control interface, rewinding the simulation to the battle's opening phase. The hegemony fleet formation prioritizes overlapping shield coverage and coordinated fire patterns. It's extremely effective against conventional opponents who engage at maximum weapons range using standardized tactics. She highlighted specific elements of the enemy formation, showing how their ships were positioned to provide mutual support while maintaining optimal firing angles. However, the formation assumes that enemy vessels will behave predictably, maintaining safe distances, engaging primary targets, and retreating when damaged. The display shifted to show the human vessel's actual movement patterns. Captain Morrison's squadron didn't break formation randomly. They executed what's called a controlled chaos protocol, deliberately unpredictable maneuvers designed to disrupt enemy targeting solutions and force the hegemony fleet to respond to threats from multiple vectors simultaneously. Cadets throughout the room were leaning forward now, studying the tactical display with new understanding. Sarah continued her analysis, showing how each seemingly suicidal human maneuver had been calculated to achieve specific, strategic objectives. The ramming attacks weren't desperation. Human ships were specifically designed with reinforced nose sections for exactly this purpose, turning the vessel itself into a kinetic weapon when conventional armaments proved insufficient. The mining charges were pre-positioned based on intelligence about hegemony shield frequencies. The atmospheric entry maneuvers exploited the fact that hegemony vessels aren't designed for gravity well operations. She manipulated the controls to show the battle's progression in real time, highlighting how human tactics had systematically degraded the enemy fleet's combat effectiveness. By the time the station was destroyed, the hegemony had lost over 60% of their vessels and been forced to retreat without achieving their primary objectives. In strategic terms, this was a decisive victory for the defenders. Instructor Velthara was silent for several long moments, her crystalline form pulsing with patterns Sarah couldn't interpret. Around the room, cadets were whispering among themselves in dozens of languages, apparently re-evaluating their assumptions about human military capabilities. Your analysis is thorough, Cadet Chen. However, the Academy's tactical assessment was conducted by senior strategists with access to classified intelligence data. Are you suggesting their conclusions were incorrect? Sarah met the instructor's gaze directly. I'm suggesting that sometimes, official conclusions reflect political considerations rather than tactical reality. The Battle of Kepler Station was a human victory achieved through innovative tactics that couldn't be easily categorized within existing military doctrine. The silence that followed was profound enough that Sarah could hear the building's structural systems adjusting to atmospheric pressure changes. She just accused the Academy's senior staff of political bias in their tactical assessments, which was either brave or suicidal depending on one's perspective. Interesting perspective, Instructor Velthara finally replied. Perhaps we should examine additional case studies to test your theories about human tactical innovation. Class dismissed. As cadets filed out of the room, Sarah noticed that several were giving her a wider berth than before. The Thorkin twins' roommates shot her hostile glares, apparently holding her responsible for their friend's current medical bay residence. More concerning was the way some of the advanced species representatives were studying her with what looked like professional interest. Kethara was waiting in the corridor when Sarah emerged, her powered suit humming softly. That was either very brave or very foolish, she observed through the suit's external speakers. Probably both, Sarah admitted. But I hate watching good people get written out of history to make politicians more comfortable. You knew this battle personally. It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded. My father served aboard the CNS Portland. He was one of the pilots who didn't make it home. They walked toward the dining facility in comfortable silence, passing groups of cadets who suddenly found reasons to examine their datapads or engage in urgent conversations when Sarah approached. Her roommate seemed oblivious to the social dynamics, but Sarah suspected the power suit's sensors were providing Kethara with more information than she let on. The Academy's main dining facility was designed to accommodate every known sentient species' nutritional requirements. Atmospheric zones maintained different gas mixtures and pressure levels, while food preparation systems could synthesize everything from crystalline energy matrices to live-prey animals. The noise level was extraordinary as hundreds of species attempted to socialize over meals that ranged from sublime to incomprehensible. Sarah collected a standard human meal package and found a relatively quiet table in the medium gravity section. Kethara's suit allowed her to consume specially prepared nutrient paste without removing her helmet, though the process looked thoroughly unappetizing. Your species fascinates me, Kethara said, between mechanical feeding cycles. Vorthans respect strength above all else, but we define strength in terms of raw physical capability and direct confrontation. Humans seem to view strength as adaptability. Adaptability. We had to. Earth isn't a particularly dangerous planet by galactic standards, but it's inconsistent. Climate changes, geological instability, ecosystem disruptions, species that couldn't adapt went extinct, so we learned to be flexible. And your military doctrine reflects this philosophy? Sarah considered her response carefully. Human warfare evolved from thousands of years of fighting other humans. We couldn't rely on superior technology or overwhelming physical advantages because our enemies had access to the same resources we did. So we got creative. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Vextar and two other Kalari nobles Sarah didn't recognize. The insectoid aliens moved with the fluid grace of natural predators, their compound eyes reflecting the dining facility's lighting in prismatic patterns. The famous human tactician, Vextar's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. We've been discussing your impressive classroom performance, Such confidence from a species barely capable of faster-than-light travel. Sarah continued eating without looking up. Did you need something? Or are you just practicing conversation skills? One of Vextar's companions, a larger male whose exoskeleton bore military rank insignia, leaned forward aggressively. Your display of primitive violence against the Thorkin cadets was impressive, but combat effectiveness requires more than simple brutality. Perhaps you would be interested in a more structured demonstration of proper military technique. Let me guess. Training exercise. Minimal supervision. Unfortunate accidents happen. The Kalari noble's laugh was like breaking glass. Training accidents are indeed regrettable, but they do serve to establish proper hierarchies within the cadet structure. Meet us at Combat Training Facility C at 0800 tomorrow. Unless, of course, you prefer to acknowledge your proper place without further embarrassment. Sarah finally looked up from her meal, studying the three aliens with the detached interest of a scientist examining specimens. Training Facility C. 0800. Should I bring anything special? Standard training weapons will be provided. Do try not to disappoint us too badly. After the Kalari delegation departed, Kethara turned her helmet towards Sarah with mechanical precision. That was clearly a trap. Combat Training Facility C is designed for advanced weapons training. They will have every advantage. Probably, Sarah agreed. But refusing would establish me as weak. And accepting gives me an opportunity to make a point. What point? Sarah smiled, and something in her expression made Kethara's suit sensors focus more intently on her face. That humanity didn't survive to reach the stars by playing fair. The next morning found Sarah standing in the center of Combat Training Facility C, a cavernous chamber designed to simulate battlefield conditions for a variety of planetary environments. Holographic projectors could create everything from dense jungle to airless asteroid surfaces, while gravity generators and atmospheric processors provided full environmental immersion. Vextar and his companions had arrived early, along with what appeared to be most of the Academy's Kalari student population. Word had spread through unofficial channels, and representatives from dozens of species had found reasons to observe the morning training session. Even some faculty members were present, though they maintained careful positions that suggested official neutrality. Standard rules, announced the supervising instructor, a scarred Thorkin veteran whose expression suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Training weapons, non-lethal force levels. Exercise concludes when one participant yields or is rendered incapable of continuing. Sarah examined the weapons rack with professional interest. Energy rifles, plasma projectors, kinetic accelerators, and several exotic systems she didn't immediately recognize. Her opponents were selecting advanced equipment that complemented Kalari physiology. Rapid-fire energy weapons that took advantage of their enhanced reflexes and compound eyes. She chose a simple kinetic rifle and a basic energy sidearm. Both human standard weapons that the Academy had included for training purposes. Compared to the exotic systems her opponents carried, her loadout looked almost primitive. Interesting choices, Vextar observed, hefting a weapon that resembled a small cannon. Are you certain you don't require more sophisticated equipment? These will do fine, Sarah replied, checking her rifle's charge indicator and cycling the action to verify proper function. The training facility's environmental systems activated, transforming the sterile chamber into a representation of contested urban terrain. Ruined buildings provided cover, while debris-filled streets created natural choke points and ambush sites. The lighting was set to simulate dusk conditions, with long shadows and patches of deep darkness that would challenge most species' visual systems. Begin exercise, the instructor announced, his voice echoing from speakers placed throughout the simulated cityscape. Sarah was already moving before the words finished echoing. While her opponents spread out to establish overlapping fields of fire, she vanished into the maze of rubble and shadows like a ghost seeking concealment. The Kalari had superior numbers, better equipment, and excellent training. But they were about to learn why humans had earned their reputation as the galaxy's most dangerous predators. The first Kalari to die, in simulation terms, never saw his killer. Sarah had positioned herself in the wreckage of what appeared to be a residential building, using fallen beams and twisted metal to create a shooting position that provided excellent fields of fire while remaining invisible from ground level. Her kinetic rifle coughed once, and the alien's training armor registered a fatal hit to his center mass. "Contact rear," Vextar snarled, but Sarah was no longer there. She'd fired and moved immediately, using the building's internal structure to mask her movement, while her enemies concentrated their return fire on empty air. The urban environment played to every advantage humans possessed while negating most Kalari strengths. Their compound eyes, optimized for detecting movement across wide fields of view, struggled to track targets moving through three-dimensional cover. Their enhanced reflexes became liabilities when forced to clear rooms and navigate obstacles that required careful foot placement rather than rapid response. Sarah moved through the ruins like a predator in her natural habitat, using sound discipline and terrain masking to remain undetected while systematically eliminating her opponents. Each shot was carefully placed to simulate lethal hits, and each position was abandoned immediately after engagement to prevent effective counterattack. The second Kalari fell when he attempted to flank her previous position, only to discover that she'd anticipated his movement and positioned herself to ambush his ambush. The third died while trying to establish overwatch from a building's upper level, unaware that Sarah had already infiltrated the structure through a partially collapsed wall and was waiting behind him when he reached his chosen firing position. When the exercise ended, Vextar was alone among the ruins, his sophisticated weapon systems useless against an enemy who refused to fight according to established conventions. His training armor registered multiple fatal hits in rapid succession as Sarah emerged from concealment at point-blank range, her simple kinetic rifle aimed at his center mass. "Exercise concluded," the instructor announced. "Victory to Cadet Chen." The silence that followed was profound. Around the facility's observation areas, cadets from dozens of species stared at the tactical display showing the engagement's progression. What they'd witnessed wasn't just an upset victory. It was a systematic demonstration of human warfare at its most effective. "Impossible," one of the faculty members whispered, loud enough for the chamber's acoustic sensors to pick up. 3 experienced Kalari warriors with advanced equipment, defeated by a single human using basic weapons. Sarah emerged from the simulated ruins, her expression calm and professional. Her breathing was slightly elevated from the physical exertion of moving through the obstacle course, but she showed no other signs of stress or fatigue. "Impressive display. Human," Vextar grudgingly admitted as his armor's medical systems finished confirming that all hits had been non-lethal training shots. "Your tactics were unconventional, standard human infantry doctrine," Sarah replied, safing her weapons and returning them to the equipment racks. "Nothing particularly creative." The watching cadets began filing out of the observation areas, their conversations a babel of languages and excited speculation. Sarah noticed that the faculty members were remaining behind, apparently engaged in an urgent discussion about what they'd just witnessed. Professor Talrath approached her as she finished equipment inspection procedures. "Cadet Chen." "My office." Now, the professor's office was a study in Kalari military tradition, with weapons and battle trophies from across the galaxy mounted on every available wall surface. Talrath settled into a chair designed for his species' physiology, while Sarah stood at attention in front of his desk. "That was not standard human infantry doctrine," he said without preamble. "That was special operations technique adapted for individual combat. Where did you learn to fight like that?" Sarah maintained her rigid posture, staring at a point above the professor's head. "Sir, I grew up on merchant vessels operating in contested space. Personal protection was a survival necessity. Don't lie to me, cadet. I've fought against human special forces during the border conflicts. Your movement patterns, tactical decision-making, and weapons handling all indicate professional military training." The professor stood and moved to examine one of his wall-mounted weapons, a hegemony plasma rifle that showed signs of combat use. "There are exactly 17 humans currently enrolled at this academy. Of those, 14 are children of diplomatic families with no military background. 2 are civilian volunteers selected through standardized testing. That leaves you." Sarah remained silent, recognizing the investigative technique. Sometimes the best response was simply waiting for the other party to reveal how much they already knew. "Your application listed your father as Michael Chen, deceased, formerly a civilian transport pilot. Your mother, as Dr. Elizabeth Chen, xenobiologist, currently serving with the Frontier Research Division. No military connections anywhere in your family history. Professor Talrath turned back toward her, his compound eyes reflecting the office lighting. Except, Michael Chen wasn't just a transport pilot, was he? He was Commander Michael Chen, Colonial Marines, decorated veteran of the Hegemony Wars, and one of the most effective special operations officers in human military history. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture that the professor's experienced eye caught immediately. Your mother isn't just a xenobiologist either. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, former naval intelligence, specialist in enemy technology assessment and psychological warfare, two of the most dangerous humans alive, and their daughter just happened to end up at the galaxy's premier military academy. The silence stretched between them for several heartbeats. Finally, Sarah spoke. What's your point? Sir? My point, Cadet Chen, is that humanity has been carefully hiding its true capabilities for years. Your species presents itself as young and inexperienced, struggling to adapt to galactic civilization. But what I just witnessed was not the performance of a primitive species learning advanced techniques. I mean, Professor Talrath moved back to his desk and activated a holographic display showing the training exercise. This was the work of a species that has perfected warfare to a degree that terrifies their enemies. And now I have to decide what to do with that information. Sarah finally met his gaze directly. What are you going to do, sir? The professor's mandibles clicked in what she was learning to recognize as grim amusement. I'm going to make sure you receive the advanced training you deserve, cadet. Because if humanity is planning to surprise the galaxy with its military capabilities, I want to be on the winning side when that happens. Professor Talrath's recommendation opened doors that Sarah hadn't known existed. Within days of her demonstration in Combat Training Facility C, she found herself transferred to Advanced Warfare Studies, a program typically reserved for fourth-year cadets with exceptional academic records and proven leadership abilities. The accelerated coursework was demanding enough that most species required neural enhancement supplements just to process the information load. Sarah thrived. Her new classes covered topics that civilian populations never heard about: xenopsychological warfare, interdimensional tactics, and something called strategic paradigm dissolution that seemed designed to break enemy civilizations at their conceptual foundations. The instructors were veterans of conflicts that didn't appear in official histories, scarred survivors of battles fought in the dark spaces between stars where conventional rules of engagement had no meaning. Warfare, explained Commander Zethvar during her first Strategic Studies lecture, is fundamentally about imposing your reality on your enemies. Technology and numbers are tools, but victory belongs to whoever can convince their opponents that resistance is futile. The ethereal instructor's form shifted between solid and translucent as she spoke, her species' natural phase variance reflecting emotional states that most beings couldn't perceive. Around the lecture hall, 23 of the Academy's most promising advanced cadets took notes on material that would reshape their understanding of conflict itself. Consider the Battle of Sigma Centauri, Commander Zethvar continued, activating a holographic display that showed a star system Sarah didn't recognize. Hegemony forces outnumbered the defenders by a factor of 50 to 1. Their technology was superior in every measurable category. Victory should have been inevitable. The display showed the opening phase of the engagement, a massive hegemony fleet emerging from hyperspace to find a single human vessel waiting in high orbit above the system's inhabited world. The scale was absurd. The human ship looked like a minnow facing a school of sharks. The defending vessel was the CNS Prometheus, experimental class, crew of 200. The hegemony fleet comprised 3,000 ships and 2 million personnel. Standard tactical analysis predicted total human defeat within 6 hours. Sarah leaned forward, studying the tactical display with professional interest. She'd heard rumors about the Prometheus incident, but details were classified well above her security clearance. According to official reports, the battle had lasted 3 days and ended with both fleets mysteriously withdrawn from the system. Instead, Commander Zethvar's form brightened with something that might have been amusement. The engagement concluded with complete hegemony withdrawal, and the Prometheus, intact. No significant casualties on either side. Care to speculate how this was achieved? A Vorthan cadet, whose environmental suit marked him as nobility, raised one manipulator arm. Superior defensive technology? Some form of enhanced shielding system? Negative. The Prometheus was armed with standard human weapons and defensive systems. An ethereal student's voice whispered directly into everyone's consciousness. Reinforcements arrived from human space? No additional human vessels participated in the engagement. Sarah found herself speaking before she'd consciously decided to contribute. They convinced the hegemony fleet that fighting wasn't worth the cost. The room went silent. Commander Zethvar's attention focused on Sarah with uncomfortable intensity, her form solidifying into sharp geometric patterns that suggested heightened interest. Elaborate. Psychological warfare. The Prometheus couldn't win a direct engagement, but they didn't need to. They just needed to make the hegemony commanders question whether achieving their objectives was worth the losses they'd sustain. Sarah stood and moved to the holographic controls, manipulating the display to show communication patterns between ships. Humans excel at improvisation and deception. I'd guess they fabricated evidence of some kind of trap or hidden weapon system. Something that would make the hegemony fleet hesitate. And if the deception was discovered, then you escalate to a real threat. Make them believe that destroying the Prometheus would trigger some kind of catastrophic response. Planet-killer weapons, dimensional instabilities, something that would make victory Pyrrhic. Commander Zethvar's form pulsed with patterns that made Sarah's eyes water. Interesting theory. However, you've overlooked the most elegant aspect of the Prometheus strategy. The display shifted, showing detailed sensor readings from the engagement. The hegemony fleet wasn't deceived about human capabilities. They were provided with completely accurate intelligence about the Prometheus's weapons, shields, and crew complement. They knew exactly what they were facing. Sarah stared at the data, trying to understand what she was missing. The numbers were clear. The human vessel had been completely outmatched by any reasonable measure. The Prometheus crew simply informed the hegemony commanders that they had no intention of surrendering, regardless of the odds. They would fight until every human aboard was dead, and they would take as many enemy vessels with them as possible. The room's atmosphere seemed to shift as the implications sank in. Several cadets were exchanging glances that suggested they were re-evaluating their assumptions about human psychology. The hegemony calculated that victory was achievable, but would cost them approximately 400 ships and 60,000 casualties. Acceptable losses for most strategic objectives. But the system they were attacking had minimal military value. The Prometheus crew had turned the engagement into a question of cost-benefit analysis. Commander Zethvar returned to her position at the front of the classroom. This is why human warfare is so effective against conventionally rational opponents. Most species fight to achieve objectives or defend territory. Humans fight because they've decided to fight, and they will continue fighting until either they or their enemies cease to exist. After class, Sarah found herself walking across the Academy's central plaza with Kethara, whose powered suit had been upgraded with additional sensor packages that made her look more like a mobile weapons platform than a cadet. Their conversations had evolved from simple roommate politeness to something approaching genuine friendship. Though Sarah suspected her companion's interest in human psychology was at least partially professional. Your species disturbs many of the advanced civilizations, Kethara observed, her suit's external speakers modulating her voice to sound almost conversational. They view humans as fundamentally irrational actors in galactic politics. Maybe we are, Sarah replied. But irrationality can be an advantage when everyone expects you to behave logically. Their conversation was interrupted by a general alert that echoed across the Academy's communication systems. Emergency lights began flashing in patterns that indicated a real crisis rather than a training exercise, and automated systems started directing cadets toward designated assembly areas. All cadets report to your designated emergency stations, announced a voice that bypassed universal translators to speak directly to neural processing centers. This is not a drill. Academy security status has been elevated to Condition Red. Sarah and Kethara joined the streams of cadets moving toward their assigned positions, but Sarah's trained eye noticed details that troubled her. Security personnel were deploying with combat equipment rather than crowd control gear. Orbital defense platforms were powering up their main weapon systems. Whatever was happening, it was serious enough that the Academy was preparing for actual battle. Their emergency station turned out to be a fortified position in the Academy's primary defensive complex, an installation built into the bedrock of the Moon's largest crater. The facility could theoretically withstand direct assault by capital ship weapons, though Sarah doubted anyone expected to test that capability. "Cadets, listen carefully," announced the sector commander, a Thorkin general whose battle armor showed signs of extensive combat use. Approximately 30 minutes ago, long-range sensors detected an unidentified fleet approaching this system. They are not responding to standard communications and are maintaining combat formations. The briefing room's holographic display activated, showing sensor readings that made Sarah's blood run cold. 300 vessels moving in perfect coordination, their energy signatures matching no known technology in the galactic database. The fleet was still 3 hours out, but their trajectory was aimed directly at the Academy. "Defensive preparations are underway," the general continued. "Orbital platforms are online, and reinforcements have been requested from Sector Command. However, given the Academy's strategic importance and the unknown capabilities of the approaching force, we are implementing emergency protocols." Sarah watched the tactical display with growing unease. The approaching fleet's formation was too perfect, their movement patterns too coordinated for any known species. More disturbing was their speed. They were moving at sublight velocities that should have been impossible for vessels of their apparent size. "All cadets will be assigned to defensive positions under faculty supervision. This is a real combat situation, and lives may depend on your training and judgment. Do not disappoint your instructors or dishonor your species." As cadets were assigned to their stations, Sarah found herself grouped with other advanced warfare studies students under Professor Talrath's direct command. Their position was in the Academy's primary sensor array, a facility that provided real-time intelligence about the approaching threat while being heavily defended enough to survive concentrated attack. "Cadet Chen." Professor Talrath's attention focused on her with uncomfortable intensity. "Your analysis of the tactical situation." Sarah studied the sensor displays, noting details that troubled her trained eye. "The formation is perfect, sir. No variation in spacing or movement patterns. Either we're facing the most disciplined force in galactic history, or those aren't piloted vessels. Elaborate. Automated systems, artificial intelligence, or some form of remote control. It would explain the coordination and the unusual energy signatures." The professor's mandibles clicked approvingly. "Correct. Preliminary analysis confirms we're facing a robotic fleet of unknown origin. This presents unique tactical challenges." Around the command center, senior officers were coordinating defensive preparations with the efficiency of professionals who'd trained for this scenario their entire careers. Orbital weapons platforms were cycling through targeting solutions, defensive shields were reinforcing critical facilities, and courier ships were preparing to carry news of the attack to Sector Command. "Unknown fleet, this is Academy Control," announced the station commander over open channels. "You are approaching restricted space. Identify yourself and state your intentions." The response came in the form of energy discharges that lit up sensor displays across the command center. The unknown fleet had opened fire at extreme range, their weapons reaching across impossible distances to impact the Academy's outermost defensive satellites. "Shields at 60%, reported a Kalari technician, her compound eyes reflecting the crimson glow of emergency lighting. "Unknown energy type. Appears to be some form of directed plasma." Sarah watched the battle unfold with professional detachment, noting how the unknown fleet's tactics differed from any doctrine in her experience. They weren't attempting to achieve specific objectives or conserve resources for extended conflict. Instead, they appeared to be systematically destroying anything that could pose a threat, methodically working their way through the Academy's defensive network. "Casualties on Platform 7. Another voice reported. "Direct hit penetrated primary shielding." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. The unknown fleet possessed weapons that could penetrate military-grade defenses at ranges where return fire was impossible. Their coordination was perfect, their targeting solutions flawless, and their apparent objective was the complete destruction of everything in the system. "Professor," Sarah said quietly, "we're fighting this wrong." Talrath's compound eyes focused on her. "Explain." "We're treating this like a conventional engagement against a rational opponent. But these are machines following programmed instructions. They're not going to negotiate, retreat, or make tactical errors based on emotion or self-preservation." "And your recommendation?" Sarah studied the displays showing the fleet's inexorable approach toward the academy itself. Conventional defensive tactics were failing because they were designed to counter living opponents who could be influenced by costs and consequences. These machines would continue their programmed mission until either they or their targets were destroyed. "We need to think like humans, sir. Asymmetric warfare. Hit them where they don't expect it." The Academy's defensive systems are already engaging at maximum efficiency. Then we stop fighting their fleet and start fighting their programming. Professor Talrath went very still, his attention completely focused on Sarah's analysis. Around the command center, other officers were beginning to listen to their conversation with growing interest. "If they're automated systems," Sarah continued, "then someone or something is controlling them. Find the control source and you can potentially compromise their coordination. Better yet, if their programming follows logical parameters, we might be able to trick them into targeting each other." "Impossible. Military-grade artificial intelligence systems are hardened against electronic warfare attacks." "Not electronic warfare. Tactical deception. Make them think their highest priority targets are other ships in their own fleet." The idea was audacious enough that several officers stopped what they were doing to stare at Sarah directly. She was suggesting they attempt to turn an entire enemy fleet against itself using nothing but creative interpretation of engagement doctrine. "How would you implement such a strategy?" asked the station commander, a Meridian admiral whose crystalline form was pulsing with stress patterns. Sarah moved to the tactical display, manipulating the controls to show the Academy's remaining defensive assets. "We need decoy transmitters broadcasting false identification signals. Make some of our platforms look like the enemy fleet's command vessels. If their targeting priorities include protecting leadership elements, they'll engage anything that threatens those signals. And if the deception fails, then we're no worse off than we are now, and we'll have learned something about their programming limitations." The command center fell silent except for the background noise of defensive systems cycling through combat protocols. Sarah's plan was either brilliant or completely insane, and nobody seemed certain which category it fell into. "Admiral," Professor Talrath spoke with unusual formality, "I recommend we implement Cadet Chen's proposal. Her tactical assessments have proven accurate in previous scenarios." The Meridian officer studied Sarah with attention that made her uncomfortable. "This strategy will require precise timing and significant resource commitment. If it fails, we'll have weakened our defenses for no tactical gain. If we don't try something unconventional, we're going to lose anyway," Sarah replied. "Conventional tactics aren't working against an unconventional enemy." Admiral Kessis-Tara's crystalline form brightened as she reached her decision. "Implement the deception protocol. All available technicians will assist in configuring the transmission arrays." What followed was 30 minutes of frantic preparation as the Academy's engineering teams worked to reconfigure defensive platforms into giant deception transmitters. Sarah found herself at the center of the effort, coordinating technical specifications with species whose understanding of electronics exceeded anything in human experience. The unknown fleet was only 20 minutes out when the first decoy signals activated. Suddenly, the Academy's sensor displays showed additional contacts, CSF, phantom ships broadcasting command codes that identified them as high-priority targets for any automated defense system. "Unknown fleet responding," reported the Kalari technician, her voice tight with excitement. "They're shifting formation to engage the decoy signals." Sarah watched the tactical display with growing satisfaction as the enemy fleet's perfect coordination began to fracture. Ships were breaking off from the main formation to engage false targets, their programming apparently unable to distinguish between real threats and sophisticated deceptions. "Two enemy vessels have opened fire on each other," announced another voice. "They're engaging what they perceive as hostile command ships." The psychological effect on the Academy's defenders was immediate. Cheers erupted from monitoring stations as they watched the unstoppable enemy fleet begin to tear itself apart through their own confused targeting systems. Additional fratricide events confirmed. The station commander reported, her crystalline form pulsing with patterns that Sarah was learning to associate with meridian excitement. Estimate 30% of enemy fleet now engaged in internal conflicts. But Sarah was studying the display with growing concern. The deception was working too well. The unknown fleet was destroying itself with mechanical efficiency, but something about their response patterns troubled her tactical instincts. "Professor," she said quietly, "I think we have a problem. The plan is working perfectly. Enemy fleet strength is degraded by nearly 40%. That's the problem. They're being too efficient about destroying each other. Real artificial intelligence would attempt to verify targets or implement error correction protocols. These systems are just following basic programming." Professor Talrath's mandibles went still. Meaning? Meaning they're not the real threat. They're a distraction. Sarah's fingers flew over the sensor controls, expanding the display to show the entire star system. Where are the ships that deployed them? The answer appeared on the displays like a cold revelation. Long-range sensors had detected additional contacts emerging from hyperspace at the system's edge, smaller vessels that had approached during the confusion of the automated fleet's attack. "New contacts bearing 27 Mark IV, announced a technician, his voice rising with alarm. "Estimate 20 vessels. Unknown configuration. Moving to intercept Academy evacuation routes." Sarah stared at the tactical display as the real situation became clear. The automated fleet had been a diversion, designed to focus defensive attention on a dramatic but ultimately manageable threat. While everyone had been watching the robot ships destroy each other, the real enemy had moved into position to achieve their actual objectives. "They're not here to destroy the Academy," she realized. "They're here to capture it." Admiral Kestara's form shifted to patterns Sarah couldn't interpret. "Explain your assessment." "The automated fleet was designed to degrade our defenses and create a crisis scenario. Now, the real attack force can approach while our shields are down and our attention is focused elsewhere." Classic misdirection. The Admiral activated the Academy's general communication systems, her voice carrying to every facility on the moon's surface. "All defensive stations. Redirect primary sensors to system perimeter. Prepare to repel boarding operations." What followed was unlike anything in the Academy's training scenarios. The unknown vessels approached with technologies that defied conventional understanding. Ships that seemed to phase in and out of normal space. Weapons that bypassed conventional shielding, and troops that moved like living shadows through the Academy's corridors. Sarah found herself fighting alongside faculty and senior cadets in a running battle through the Academy's residential sectors. The enemy troops were humanoid but wrong in ways that made her tactical instincts scream warnings. They moved too fluidly, absorbed weapon hits that should have been fatal, and demonstrated coordination that exceeded anything possible for biological entities. "They're not alive," she reported to Professor Talrath, as their defensive position came under assault by entities that flickered between solid and translucent states. Some kind of energy constructs or dimensional projections. The professor's weapon fire was having minimal effect against targets that seemed to exist only partially in normal spacetime. Recommendations? Recommendations? Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, trying to find some vulnerability in enemies that operated according to physics she didn't understand. Then she remembered something from her advanced warfare studies classes about dimensional warfare and beings that existed across multiple reality layers. "Environmental systems," she said, ejecting the power pack from her rifle and beginning to reconfigure its internal components. "If they're maintaining coherence through dimensional anchoring, we need to disrupt the local spacetime matrix. That could destabilize the entire facility, better than letting them capture the Academy and everyone in it." Working with tools improvised from weapon components and maintenance equipment, Sarah began assembling a device that would have been impossible for any species other than humans to conceive. Her approach combined theoretical principles from dimensional physics with the kind of creative engineering that only emerged from desperate necessity. The improvised dimensional disruptor activated just as enemy forces breached their defensive perimeter. Reality seemed to stutter and flux around them, and the attacking entities suddenly became fully solid and vulnerable to conventional weapons. "Now!" Sarah shouted, and the Academy's defenders opened fire with everything they had. The battle that followed was brief but decisive. Cut off from whatever dimensional anchor points they'd been using, the enemy forces found themselves fighting according to normal physical laws, where superior numbers and training gave the Academy's forces decisive advantages. When the shooting stopped, Sarah found herself standing in a corridor littered with the remains of technology that shouldn't have been possible. Around her, faculty and cadets were staring at the quiet human who had somehow saved them all through sheer creative thinking and impossible improvisation. Professor Talrath approached her, his compound eyes reflecting expressions she couldn't interpret. "Cadet Chen, you've exceeded even my expectations for human tactical innovation." "Just doing my job, sir." "No." The professor's mandibles clicked with what she'd learned to recognize as profound respect. "You've demonstrated something that our enemies clearly didn't expect. Humanity's greatest strength isn't your technology or your numbers. It's your ability to find solutions that shouldn't work, but do anyway." Sarah looked around at the Academy's defenders, dozens of species working together to secure their shared institution against threats that transcended normal understanding. "Maybe that's what makes us good allies, sir. We're too stubborn to know when we're beaten." In the days that followed, as investigators tried to determine who had launched the attack and why, Sarah found that her reputation had evolved beyond simple respect into something approaching awe. The quiet human had become the Academy's fiercest warrior, not through violence or intimidation, but through the kind of innovative thinking that turned impossible situations into manageable problems. But more importantly, she'd demonstrated that humanity's true contribution to galactic civilization wasn't technological advancement or military might. It was the ability to look at any situation, no matter how hopeless, and find a way to make it work in their favor. The galaxy was about to discover that having humans as allies was like having reality itself on your side, and that was a force even the most advanced civilizations couldn't match through conventional means. Standing in the Academy's rebuilt command center weeks later, watching new cadets arrive from across the galaxy, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that first transport journey. She was no longer the quiet human that others dismissed or underestimated. She was exactly what humanity had always been. A species that thrived on impossible challenges and turned adversity into advantage through sheer creative stubbornness. And that, she realized, was the most terrifying weapon any civilization could possess.